Hi everyone, I'm HaZ Dulull and I'm a filmmaker. And today I'm super excited about talking at this year's RazerCon 2020. And my talk is going to be about my recent project, Mutant Year Zero, which is a CG animated feature film in production. Now, this production was done during the lockdown, as for obvious reasons for COVID, we've all had to work from home. So pretty much most of the film was actually put together here in my humble home and studio in London. So firstly, check out 60 seconds of Mutant Year Zero.
The Ark is humanity's last outpost, with the guidance of our leader, the Elder. He relies on stalkers, adventurers who leave the Ark, explore the zone, and scavenge for precious resources. Stalkers have to be more than human. That's me, Mr. More Than Human, aka a mutant. Our mission, he says, is a man, and that man is Hammond.
Sign us up for a suicide mission, Mr. Elder. This is insane.
The fate of the Ark depends on it.
You get to die. I have to live for all eternity.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah!
Seriously?
Okay, so that was super fun to work on, and we all had a blast making that early footage of Mutant Year Zero. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty and breaking down the various steps I took to making that early footage of Mutant Year Zero, let me just give you a little backstory on how I got to where I am today in terms of directing animated feature films like Mutant Year Zero. And I guess it all started from my recent projects, which included the feature films The Beyond, which was a commercial hit on all the VOD platforms, including trending on Netflix. Also, 2036 Origin Unknown, starring Katie Sackhoff, which had a limited theatrical release in the US before also landing on Netflix. This led me to directing television, and I directed the pilot and 3 other episodes for Disney's action comedy miniseries Fast Lane, which you can actually now watch on the Disney Plus channel if you have that. As a filmmaker, I've always loved pushing the boundaries when telling high concept genre stories. Therefore, being a hands-on director with a solid grasp of this technology actually allows me to create a space for my collaborators and the actors to really live and breathe the worlds that I actually love building to tell these stories. So how did I fall into the world of directing CG animation? Well, it actually all started early this year when a comic book company reached out to me to ask me to direct and produce a proof of concept. And this project was called The Theory, and I picked a story called Battlesuit. And Battlesuit is essentially a CG animated proof of concept, essentially a pilot, in order to be made into a television series. And that was my first time, me and my team, really diving into creating CG animation using the Unreal Engine. So here's a clip of Battlesuit.
I could spend my entire career analyzing just one planet, looking at one species, without ever knowing for sure if I got their history right.
Hello! Watch your back! My leg! My leg! Are you here to replace us?
Here to replace you? No, no, no. We couldn't do what we do without you.
So Battlesuits came out on May 2020, and it was widely received in all the press, which was really cool. It was also part of a huge MadeWithBlade campaign from Razer, mainly because the entire animation that you saw was created entirely on a Razer Studio 15 laptop, which is powered by a Quadro 5000 RTX card. And it was all done here in this room. And it was quite groundbreaking because, you know, it was just a small team of like 3 people, including myself, that put that all together. So we were now in a position where we had doors open for us, and especially for me as a filmmaker, to actually dive into directing and producing animated films. And very soon we started to look for our next project. And that involved me talking to an amazing production company in Los Angeles called Pathfinder Media, who actually produce movies and TV shows, but they also have some great IP, which includes Conan the Barbarian, but also Mutant Year Zero, which is what I'm here today talking to you about. So the way I'm going to do this, now that you've seen the trailer, you know what the clip's about and so on, I'm just going to break down exactly how it was all put together. And I'm going to do that while going on my computer, going through the screens and everything while I'm recording here, okay? So here goes. When we started this project, version 4.25 of Unreal Engine was released, and there was a ton of new features in there. Plus, also, I upgraded to using an NVIDIA Quadro RTX 6000 graphics card inside an eGPU chassis unit, as opposed to what we did on Battlesuit, which was I used a Quadro RTX 5000 in my laptop. Hence the speed with everything on lit mode. That allowed us to create even bigger and complex sets with lots of effects and animated characters and assets live in real time, whilst I was able to explore around the environments to find my shots. As you can see, I'm still using the same technique with motion mixing animation in the sequencer just to get the performance I want with the characters. Now, action's a big trademark of mine in all of my projects, and Mutant Year Zero is going to push action much further. I wanted to take that single one camera take concept, you know, the ones that you see in movies like Gravity or 1917, and push it to some insane heights to elevate the edge of the seat thrills. Now, this particular camera move was actually a last minute thought I had when I was moving the camera around to frame up the action. I think I must have accidentally keyframed one of the positions too low on the ground, so when I was scrubbing back and forth, I noticed it and thought, actually, that's a cool shot. So again, thanks to the power of real time, I'm able to find these accident moments and just turn them into cool ideas. Then to really push it, I timed each vehicle action like a dance, so the choreography was all managed inside Unreal Engine Sequencer, and the action shot became this 570 frame single take action, where I was able to tweak each element on the fly, from the car spinning to the spaceship zipping by to the characters, sliding across the road to the explosions. I was doing all of this as I was scrubbing through the scene, again not waiting for any processing or rendering to be done. In this project, I utilized ray tracing not just to create a cool cinematic look, but also for direction and story purposes. So let's look at this real-time shot, for example. You can see that I'm using it to reveal the aftermath of a chaos that's just happened as we move across the street towards the water puddle, just to build up anticipation with a reveal via reflection, before panning up to ultimately show the audience there's literally hundreds of these killer drones. One of the things we did in this project, in order to push it to another level with quality and production value, was adding real physics to the objects. So things like wind causing a newspaper page to move as we provide plot points to the story for the audience makes the scene feel more alive. The same thing with the character's cloak, which creates this sense of mystery about him, but also elevates the cinematic nature of the scene. It's one of those things, like if you don't have the physics cloak, then the scene feels a little flat and dead. But with this, it feels right and kind of provides this high-level nature to the animation. We knew we had to take our human character side of things to another level when you compare it to the last project Battlesuit. So for the creation of the character Selma, we turned to Reallusion Software Character Creator Free and iClone to build the character, rig it, and animate it before integrating it directly into the Unreal Engine scenes, where I could then just take it further with the animation. The most impressive thing about the Reallusion character workflow is that it's extremely fast to prototype your character concepts with high quality results, utilizing the digital human skin and eye shaders, and along with dynamic hair and clothes. And for someone like me that isn't very technical or had the ability to actually create human characters from scratch, this is a great addition to that kit bashing workflow that we've been doing so far. Oh, and did I mention that action's a big thing in my filmmaking? So naturally, we had to have bigger explosions, and this time we use Unreal Engine's Niagara system to allow us to have better control on the way the particles look for things like explosions and smoke, to give them more of a volumetric feel than we had before. We also utilised physics with debris from the explosion too, again all in real time with Niagara's control system, which Andrea actually set up in a way that allowed me to have control to tweak the parameters as I see fit by adjusting the values and sliders. Now we have to remember, guys, that this is all final pixels, meaning there's no compositing done on any of these shots. Now, Unreal Engine's 4.25 improved the way we render out the final pixel shots, and instead of capturing them like we did in Battlesuits, we now had a dedicated movie pipeline renderer that allows us to just not only batch queue render all of my shots, which is a really great feature, but it also allows us to render out EXRs, high resolution formats like 4K and more, and crank up the anti-aliasing and samples to allow for a more crisp cinematic final pixel render. Lastly, one of the things we're currently looking at now is how to find a unique style to the animation we're doing, as opposed to just relying on CG cinematic look. So I'm spending my time to experimenting with cel shading, combining CG backgrounds with cel shaded characters, and just really having fun exploring the various art direction we could potentially take this film in. And once again, the beauty of this workflow means as a director, I can be so hands-on in that process, whilst also collaborating with my artists in a more efficient, intimate, and fun way, and really just try things out, because why not? It's not like we have to wait for rendering, right? So as we continue to develop the Mutant Year Zero project and push it into production, one of the things I'm actually interested in is ways to extend audience experience, to elevate the experience further. And one of the things we're doing is actually synchronizing the action and mood of the entire film with the Razer's Chroma Lighting ecosystem. So what that means is if you have your peripherals like your keyboards, your mice, your main PC, your screens, or anything that has the Chroma Lighting involved in there, and you're watching the project on your laptop or on your PC screen or even via a projector, all your peripherals are going to light up in synchronization with the key action sequences. So as you can see on the screen there, I've got explosions, and I've got like the palette being blue and yellow, or we go to a red palette. Your lighting on your peripherals is going to light up. Now that's a really cool way of experiencing the movie itself, and kind of throws you as the audience more immersed with the whole idea of the lighting kind of affecting the way you view this content.
Heads up.
Let's get to it. Come on!
Hiya, boys! Give me a freaking break.
No! Please stop. Are you in need of a funeral director? Bye-bye.
Okay, so I guess that's the end of my presentation, and I'm hoping that I've inspired somehow, or you guys have taken nuggets of information that would be inspiration for you guys and motivate you guys to go off and make your own content. Because here's the thing, like I've mentioned throughout this presentation, we're in a really interesting time. This is real-time technology in the grasp of our hands, and it's free to download. You can download Unreal Engine for free. You can work on your Razer laptop. You could pretty much do all the stuff you have at home. You can start making really cool content, and that's very exciting. As you saw in my presentation, I'm very hands-on in all of the aspects. I'm animating cameras and so on. That's all education that I learned just by watching YouTube and the tutorials and just trying things out. So not only am I excited from a filmmaker's point of view of the the fact that I can tell these stories and in a democratized animation way, but most importantly, other filmmakers out there now that were quite afraid to do animation can now look at Unreal Engine, look at the tech and say, hey, we could do this too. So I'm excited about the new stories that are going to be coming out, the new brave and bold ideas that were usually pretty crazy to read on the script and pretty much unfilmable. You can now do it using Unreal Engine, using real-time animation to create this cinematic level quality of content. So yeah, so now I guess it's a Q&A time where you get to ask me a bunch of questions and I'll be more than happy to answer them.
I hope you are all enjoying the content we brought to you here at RazerCon 2020. The man before you, starting as an ambitious visual effects artist on some of the titles you know and love, has worked his way to a man of many hats, writer, producer, and director. HaZ Dulull, I'm so happy to be speaking with you. How are you doing today?
Hi, thanks. I'm super happy to be here, and I'm really excited about this. This is like, I've been watching the event. It's really cool, really amazing.
Oh yeah, I'm super stoked because we have a good chunk of time right now to really deep dive into your background, your experience with the Razer products, because I know you have a very in-depth story to tell. So I'm gonna put you under the limelight for everybody that is so curious about the kind of work that you do. And first, right off the bat, I just wanna get the initial background. How did you become a part of the creative industry in general?
Yeah, I started out working in video games. So like when I was in high school, I just loved playing video games a lot. So I got a job working in video games doing game cinematics. This is back like PlayStation 1 days, PC, you know, games like Quake were very big back then. Kind of shows my age a little bit. But what's really interesting that I got to really tell stories using video games. And I kind of rose up to that, and around 2003, I decided to go and work in visual effects. And I worked on movies like 10,000 BC, Harry Potter, and I kind of just rose up and became what you call a compositor, then a visual effects supervisor, end up like being nominated for various visual effects society awards for like shows for the BBC, Discovery. But in between all of those visual effects gigs, I was making short films. Like we have time, right? And I decided to make some short films, and one of them went viral. Yeah, one of them went viral, and it was one called Project Kronos. I ended up getting a whole Hollywood thing, you know, managers, agents calling me up from LA. And for around 2 years, you know, I was in development. I was writing projects for Fox, Paramount. But the thing is, though, around 2016, I decided I just got to go and make my first feature. And I made my first feature called The Beyond, which came out in 2018. It was a massive hit, as I, you know, kind of mentioned on my, you know, my presentation. And then I end up doing another film with Katie Sackhoff, you know, the one that was in Battlestar Galactica, now in Another Life. And then I end up directing for Disney. So you can see my progression was just, I just kept on making stuff. Like, you know, whenever I could, just kept making content. And eventually I just got to a point where I started my own production company where I am today, and just doing it for a living, which was freaking amazing.
It is a pretty surreal feeling, right? How you kind of end up in that spot where you think, oh, I'm actually here. How did this happen, when you're on the grind the entire time? And I truly enjoyed the depth that you offered in the bit that we just received from you, talking about your experiences with Unreal Engine 4 and the different aspects that go into this creation. You mentioned the viral aspect, that it was a viral short film that really gave you your moment. Do you feel that was a distinct break for you, that put you from hoping this would be something that collectively you could do as a whole for your body of work to, hey, I'm really making my mark in this industry?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for me, like, I always planned to make like 5 or 6 short films, do the whole festival route. By the way, I didn't do any festivals. You know, it was basically the internet was kind of like broke out for me. But for me, like, the minute Project Kronos went viral and I was getting interest in Hollywood, that's when it became, oh no, this is real. You know, this is happening now. And I really had to get my A game on. So, you know, I spent a lot of time, like, you know, doing proof of concepts, doing a lot of scripts, doing a lot of visual work, and working with writers and producers in Hollywood. But really, like, it was really down to timing. You know, I made a short film that was science fiction. It was on the same time movies like District 9 came out, and then movies like Chronicle later on came out. So there was a hunger for science fiction. I think just creating the right content, releasing it at the right time, was a big part of how I was able to get where I am today, I think.
Yeah, and science fiction in particular, you mentioned that, and that is a huge theme in the body of work that you have pushed forward. I think it's fair to say a passion when it comes to that. How did you end up originally digging roots into that genre?
Yeah, you know, for me, I grew up watching science fiction films. Like, you know, I'm an 80s kid, so, you know, I watch all the Spielberg films. You know, one of my favorite films is Flight of the Navigator, which, and not many people talk about that film. And my second movie was pretty much a homage to Flight of the Navigator, because it's about a human character and a robot, right? So I made it very clear I was paying a homage to it. But I think for me, it's when my dad first came home with a VHS copy of Blade Runner. I think I was around 12. And I shouldn't be watching that film because it was like R-rated, I think. But I put it, and my dad put it on, and I was blown away. And I didn't know at the time, like, what I was watching. I was like, you know, this is amazing. I've never seen anything like this. And it's so dark and gritty, yet it's so, like, it reflected society. And like a decade later, I'm looking around and everything's very Blade Runner. And that's what really made me think that science fiction as a genre is very powerful, because it reflects today's society, but also predict what the future could be. And if you look around us, we are in a very Blade Runner world. Everyone's wearing masks, right? There's LED neon lights is very popular, technology with tablets, and now we're talking about developing flying cars. So yeah, Blade Runner kind of predicted the future in a way, I think.
I think that's probably one of the key interesting components we can agree on in this quarantine situation. So many in line with apocalyptic feels that we're used to seeing in our science fiction films. And maybe at least for sci-fi fans like you and myself, it can bring a little bit of joy of feeling it's almost like bringing that virtual to reality. And you mentioned the fact that you've gotten to work on a lot of these, not just your short films that you were creating, but then getting to be on these full pictures. But it wasn't just you working as a visual effects artist on movies like Dark Knight. You eventually went to the next step and moved into feature films, creating them yourself. How did you make that transition?
Yeah, that transition was, again, all down to timing. Like, I've always wanted to be a filmmaker, but I never went to film school. For me, my film school was working in visual effects. So even as a VFX artist working on movies, and working on TV shows and also doing previs on films like The Dark Knight, that was all education for me. I'm learning from some of the best directors. I also learned from some not so good directors. But for me, you learn from all of that. And then when you get to a point where you become a visual effects supervisor, I think it was when I became a VFX supervisor, where that job usually means you're not creating the pictures on the computer, but you're on the set, you're on location, working with the other directors, you're working for television, you're working with the showrunners, and you're problem solving. You're constantly problem solving. You're like, how do I achieve this amazing effect for like a tight schedule and a really tight budget? That was my job as a VFX supervisor. And then I became a VFX producer, where I was dealing with the budgets, like how much does it cost now to make these effects? And all of that, if you add it all up, that became such a big pool of knowledge that when I stepped into directing, I already had knowledge on how to make movies, for starters, but also all the things that went wrong on previous films of other directors have seen and things that went well. But also I knew how to work with studio executives, because being a VFX producer, you're constantly dealing, negotiating numbers and schedules. So that became a grounded route for me, and it became like a natural progression for me. Like, I've been on set, I know how to work with a cinematographer, I know how to work with the crew, I knew the set etiquette, I knew the rules. And you also know about how time is a massive, massive thing on a film set, and how to use that really well, and how to make decisions very quickly as well.
And that actually brings us into the big meat and potatoes of what we're talking about here today, because you just talked about how when getting onto a set, you know how to work with people in certain roles. But the fact of the matter is, we're in the middle of a quarantine. We don't have that same access. And because of your work specifically with the Razer Blade and our Made by Blade aspect that we're about to talk about, you have been working on a film solely on the Razer Blade. Is that correct?
Correct. Absolutely. And done right here in this room, as we, I'm actually talking on that laptop. So, yeah, it's been interesting because, like, it's around January. And I was in development on several live action projects that were actually supposed to be shooting now. Obviously, we're not doing that till next year. And I wanted to find a way to keep telling stories. That, I don't want to sit around waiting for live action to get back in. I had a load of scripts, I had ideas, I had my own production company. But also I knew that, by the time we got to around May, June, we're like quarantine lockdown. So I knew I had to find a way of tell stories. And it was basically this comic book company, that had that battlesuit that battlesuit project I just showed you. They reached out and said, we want to do this live action. And they didn't have a lot of money, but also, it was very important for me to do something that was better than what I did last year. So I pitched animation, especially with like Love, Death and Robots being so huge on Netflix. And I love Death and Robots. There was an appetite. So I decided to do that all within the confinement of my house, and two other artists, Ronan and Andrea, who I work with all the time now on animation. And we worked remotely. So we had already worked remotely, using Dropbox and, online. And so when the pandemic hit, we were already in a situation where we're working online. But what became interesting was we were getting a lot of phone calls from studios going, hey, you know, we're seeing you're doing animation. But what's interesting is I don't have a PC and I don't use PCs. I'm a, you know, before using a Razer, I was using a MacBook Pro, you know, so I was constantly editing because, you know, I wasn't doing effects anymore. I was being a director and a producer. So mainly I'm looking at editorial timelines and making notes and stuff and maybe doing the odd visualization. But it's only when I started downloading Unreal Engine and I started to see the potential of like doing high-end previs on my laptop. And before pandemic, I'll be going to meetings. And last year, I'll be going to like LA 5 or 6 times a year. So I will be constantly on my laptop because it just didn't make sense to have a desktop machine. But when it came down to making an animated pilot, like Battlesuits, for example, I'm like, I'm not going to go out and buy a PC like just for that. And because I have a small apartment in London, the prices are friggin' expensive in London for apartments. So I wanted to be able to still be mobile, even going out for meetings, you know, being social distance, wearing masks. I wanted my laptop to be able to show people stuff. But also I want to be able to go to the kitchen and work away. I don't want to be stuck in the same desk. You know, psychologically for me as an artist, I want to change my surroundings. And that's where the Razer laptop came in super useful. But what was really cool, originally when I had the Razer laptop, I wasn't really expecting to do final renderings, like rendering 4K renders. I was expecting to do some work, do the work, do the animation, do small renders like this size, and then send it out to my colleagues to render on their big computers. But what I found was that I was rendering 4K final renders on a laptop. And this is like insane because this little beast is it's rendering. So, and then it was around May, June, I got a call from a studio in LA saying, listen, we got a feature film. We're looking for a feature film director to take on this adaptation of a video game called Mutant Year Zero. And I was very well aware of the video game. But more importantly, the video game was made in Unreal Engine. So I asked the game developers, the bearded ladies, and Funcom, the publisher, to send me some of their video game assets that were built in Unreal. And on the Razer, I was able to put together a really quick pitch. So traditionally, you know, when you're pitching on a movie, you create like a 20-page pitch deck. And you do this whole thing like we're doing now, like, you know, you pitch on a video or something, or you go for a meeting. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to create a little 30-second clip that pretty much shows what this movie is and what my vision for the movie was. And I did that, and they were blown away by it. And they all assume I did this on a big studio with like, you know, tons of render farms. And then I was showing them behind the scenes, and they're like, okay, I see there's a laptop, but where's the machine that's doing this? I'm like, no, that's the laptop rendering the 4K renders. And they couldn't get it around their heads. They're like, we're expecting a huge team. And that to me was like when I realized we're at a point technologically where creatives like myself and other filmmakers can really do stuff on very little hardware. But also when you get to a point where you're making feature films now, like obviously Battlesuit was done on a laptop. But now that we're doing Mutant Year Zero, we're rendering HDR, we're rendering 4K, we're rendering much longer. And it's a feature film, so your quality has to crank up much higher. I don't still need to buy a desktop. I don't have to do that. I actually got a Razer Core X, and I got the latest NVIDIA Quadro 6000 cards at the time and put that in. And that's just at the bottom of my desk without taking up any space. I'm able to swap out cards. And again, as a filmmaker, especially an independent filmmaker that doesn't have the backing of a huge studio backing me, for me, I've got to keep up to date with the GPU, and that is the graphics card, not the machines. So I'm in a position now that next year, when the new graphics card come out, I can swap that out and still work on my laptop because everything is just perfectly working on my laptop. That's huge for a small independent studio like myself.
Oh, that is definitely huge. I mean, my household is one half of it is always working in Unreal Engine 4, and then like yourself, I'm also a fan of Adobe Creative Suite. Rendering is the death of me sometimes. So I can imagine how crazy that must feel, right? You're working on a laptop, but it still has this desktop performance, and you mentioned the mobility being a key aspect. Do you kind of forget that you're not working on some big room-filling rig, but rather something that is so portable, yet just as powerful as other aspects?
Yeah, you can easily forget that, you know, very easily. Like before the pandemic hit in the UK, this was around, you know, it's around April. We still had a bit of time. You know, I would go to like Ronan's office, and we'll just bring the laptop. So I'll be animating one night, and he'll be creating an asset, and be like, oh, you know, we should put this on your scene. I'm like, well, instead of like downloading very heavy files, I'll bring my laptop, and he'll, you know, to his office, and he'll put the assets on, do the tweaks, and by the time I leave his office, I've got the finished scene. I can go back home and continue working. And the cool thing is, at the time also, when you're directing commercials on set or you're directing other projects, like for example, like for Battlesuit, we use Epic's London lab to do some of the voice recording and the facial captures. And even going to the music studio at the time, I was able to bring my laptop, do the recordings, put the voice recording on the scene in Unreal Engine, and the actors can see it all on the computer. And then when I go back home, I'm continuing working. There's none of this process of copying and pasting and moving stuff around, relinking. You just continue working. And for me, that's the power of mobility, is the fact that it never interrupts my workflow as a filmmaker. I'm constantly on the move, constantly working away. And it just helps hugely, because it doesn't feel like I'm being disruptive when I go to a meeting, or I'm being disruptive when I'm traveling at the time. Yeah.
It's almost not a surprise that others are surprised by the fact that you're a one-person operation that's making all of this possible, just because we're so familiar with the products that you're using, right? But maybe those that aren't will be caught off guard a bit. When speaking specifically about working on Mutant Year Zero, you gave us some previews and what it takes to go into the texturing and other aspects of it. What does the timeline look like for working on a full-length film like that, especially within this capacity?
Absolutely. Well, you know, the interesting thing is, if you asked me that question last year, and I was doing this not in Unreal Engine, but I was doing this in the traditional computer graphic way of making animation, I would tell you we need 2 to 3 years before you get this movie, you know, seen on screen. The stuff you saw in my presentation was early footage, early production, which means that we were making the movie already. So in terms of timeline, you know, we're going to ramp up probably around January. We're going to start casting for the voices around that time too. We're looking to finish that movie within 12, maybe 12 to 14 months. Now that is most producers that are familiar with animation were like, what? You are crazy. But I'm then showing them like, well, here's the thing. Traditionally, when you're making animated films, you got to do the storyboards, you then got to do the animatic, then you got to do your blocking, then you got to do these various stages. Whereas what we're doing here is we only render what we want to see, which means there's pretty much only one rendering pass. There isn't like compositing or all these other layers that you usually have to familiarize yourself with, right? Which means that if we're blocking a shot, especially if I am blocking a shot and Andrea's building the environment, and I've got Ronan who's doing all the character animation, all of that is in real time. Now, it's so cool to say the word real time at RazerCon, because most people here are video game players, and they understand the power of real time. So imagine making content at the same speed of playing a video game. That's mind-blowing, especially to financiers, especially to producers and actors as well, who are able to see their voices and performance pretty much in real time, instantly, as the movie's being made. That's a game changer. And I'm not the only one going to be doing this. You're going to see a lot of filmmakers out there that are going to be releasing really cool content, because we're in a place now where we don't have to rely on huge amounts of money, huge infrastructure, and huge resources. You know, you just get the best that you want to work with and get a small team and have a passion and drive, and you can make content that is on par with some of the big Netflix shows you're seeing.
Yeah, I think that's one of those aspects that maybe isn't fully understood, what it actually takes the breadth to go into something, especially when you have that depth with an animation team, a VFX team, you have people blocking out the cinematics, especially when you're working on a game specifically, and then obviously in the film scenario, trying to get the aesthetic and everything right. And you personally are a very busy individual. I was perusing over through the HaZ Film website before, looking at all the products. For those of you watching, by the way, if you haven't looked at what he has worked on, I really highly encourage you to do so, because you may be surprised and think, oh, these are some of my favorites. But while working on Mutant Year Zero, are there any other projects, I know you kind of mentioned some, that you're able to talk about that you're working alongside this or in the future?
Absolutely. Here's the thing, when, you know, being a filmmaker, you can't just have one project. Now, if you speak to any director that's out in Hollywood, they'll always tell you they've got like 10 projects, but they're all at various stages, right? I'm quite fortunate to be in a position where I'm still able to make a living by telling stories in animation. And animation is a huge demand at the moment. So right now, as we're speaking, I'm actually working on an episode for an anthology. So an anthology is like 10 directors around the world, 10 episodes put into a feature film. They did that with movies like VHS1, those kind of horror anthologies. This is a sci-fi horror anthology. Although I can't mention, you know this, all right? But I can't mention the name yet because the press release comes out next week. But what I can tell you is there's 10 directors, there's 10 stories about an event that's happening, and there's different angles taken. Mine's all set in London, naturally. But mine is the only episode that is entirely animated. All the other 9 episodes are live action being shot. So it's kind of like, remember the movie Kill Bill, where you see the animated part comes up? That's kind of my episode. And I'm able to do this right here, again, all on a Razer laptop with the same team and the hardware, non-disruptive. So while Mutant Year Zero is doing its thing, we're still prepping that, I'm still able to work on multiple shows. And my team are able to work on multiple shows as well. And that's powerful. That's a really powerful place to be in because it really feels like you do have a mini studio where there's a lot of projects going on.
I mean, I'm thinking back to the laptop that I had in film school that was not a Razer Blade, and by the 4 years, toast, done. It's so hard to handle a lot of the things that you end up putting that through. And speaking of which, thinking back to when you were starting out in the industry, when I was, a lot of people, they're always looking to those that have success stories to give the advice and drive towards the future. Being as somebody that has moved into a way where you have such an impact in your hands in so many projects, what would your advice be, especially with the materials and products that are available now for home, for anyone that is aspiring to be a creator within this industry?
Yeah, definitely. Like, the advice I would give everyone is, go off and make content. Firstly, there's no rules in the way you make the content. There really isn't. You shouldn't have to wait to get access to the best Arri Alexa camera. I mean, you can shoot stuff on an iPhone, okay? You can shoot stuff on an iPhone and you can still be making a movie, or if you want to go and use a video game engine, whether it's Unreal or whether it's Unity, even if you just want to draw a bunch of frames and put them together and do some kind of cell shaded thing, it doesn't matter. We're in a position that you can make whatever you want. Back in the day, when I was starting out, it was very hard. There was a lot of gatekeepers. You had to go for a specific, studio or specific festival to get recognized. But today, you can make stuff, put it online, tap into your right audience, and boom, you have access. People can see your stuff. So my advice is make content. Also, try to make content that is timely. And obviously that shouldn't influence your creativity, but at the same time, if you want to make a living out of this, try to look at what's in the market. Like right now, a lot of my animation had that very Love, Death, and Robot energy to it, because we know there's going to be a season 2 coming out, but also every studio is looking for these type of animation. The other thing also is, don't be afraid to put your work online. Really don't be afraid. I mean, there's a lot of, I used to be that guy too, by the way. I used to be like, oh, it's not ready. It's not finished. Oh, I don't know what people are going to think. Here's the thing. No matter how amazing how perfect your short is going to be or your film's going to be, there's always going to be haters. And there's always going to be people that's art. It's like Marmite. We have a saying in London, it's like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it, right? So don't be afraid of that. At the end of the day, just make content. Your first one's never going to be perfect. I mean, hell, I look at every project and go, wow, I wish I could make that better. But that's part of filmmaking. Filmmaking is every project you do is different. It's harder. There's things you learned from the last one that you may not achieve on this one, but it's trial and error. And the thing is, though, you can't wait for people to give you the license to go off and make something. You are that licensee. You should be able to go off and make that yourself. So that's the advice I would say. Yeah.
It's great advice, and you actually remind me of the words one of my mentors had said, a project is never finished, you just stop working on it and put it up there. Yes. So yes. Definitely that aspect of you always want to go and fix things. Yeah, but an interesting thing too, when you're starting, I'm sure there are those that inspired you, and now you're the one that's inspiring so many others. What names pop in your head as far as creative inspirations for the work you do?
Definitely. I think for me, obviously you have your classics in terms of people that inspire you storytelling wise. People like James Cameron. For me, I grew up watching movies like The Terminator, Terminator 2, Aliens. Those have a special moment in my heart, and I always reference those films. But in terms of when I was starting out, there was directors like Neil Blomkamp who did District 9, which blew my mind away. But also I felt there was a connection because he was a visual effects artist that then ended up making commercials, and then he ended up making District 9. And then there's, from my home, being Brit in the UK, we have Gareth Edwards, who went off and did a movie called Monsters. I remember watching the making of Monsters and how he was doing all the effects himself and how he kept it very guerrilla and he just shot it himself. And I'm like, wow, I can do that. I can operate a camera. I can do the effects. This guy's gone off and done it. Right, now is the time for me to do this. There literally is no excuse. And sometimes you just need to see an example of someone else doing it. You're like, I can do that now. So those are the two names, like Neil Blomkamp and Gareth Edwards that really inspired me to, get off my ass and actually do the work. Yeah.
I love that you make sure to be inspired by the one that started in visual effects themselves and then went on to projects even larger than the single role. It's always great when you can find someone to kind of connect to and mirror off in that way. You mentioned earlier that you started in gaming as well before going into specifically films. What were some original games that you played, or what are you playing right now when you're locked up at home and using your Razer Blade for something other than producing?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a huge Call of Duty fan. I love the idea of just picking up a controller and just having fun with that. Especially after you spend so long looking at a scene, you kind of want to break away from that. But also, I'm playing on my PS4, for example, I play Death Stranding. I love Death Stranding. Now, I know there's mixed reviews about that, but for me, I love the escapism of just walking around and just weird stuff happening. And, the interesting thing is, video games play a lot of part they influence me a lot creatively. Like this episode I'm directing at the moment, it's very dark and moody, and there's a lot of fog everywhere. And a lot of that was inspired playing games like Silent Hill, because I love games like Silent Hill. And, I'm a huge Hideo Kojima fan. We have Death Stranding. But, and you look at games like Call of Duty, which I play on my PC. And, and the thing about Call of Duty is every version of that game just gets better and better, like aesthetically, but also story-wise. And I look at video game story, and I'm like, if I'm hooked on a video game where I'm focused playing it, but yet I'm so hooked on the story, then the stories that I tell in film and television have just got to be just as good or better. And, we're in an interesting time, because when I started off in video games, doing PS1 games, cinematics, we used to be looked at as like, oh, you guys make video games. That's not film. You guys aspire to be like us. Now it's the other way around. Like, we look to video games. We look at Call of Duty, Death Stranding. We look at Watch Dogs. We look at all those amazing games and get inspired by it. But also, people that work in video games jump over to film. People who work in film jump over to games, because it's the same tool sets we're using. We're still using Maya. We still use Unreal Engine. We use Nuke, After Effects. And those tools share. So now those lines have blurred massively from an economic point of view, but also from a creative point of view as well. And that's really interesting to see that over the decade or so.
Yeah. It is cool hearing that, because even when I hear people that specifically work on the cinematics in games, they often refer to them as movies. I'm working on this movie, because so much of the process is the same when crossing between them. And you have created so many of these pieces of art. And before I let you go, I have to put you on the spot. You talk about always improving, always going on to the next project, but which of all of the scenes that you have created is your top #1 favorite?
Oh, that really is putting me on the spot, because, every project has my favorite. I think, for me, can I have two, or is it just the one? I can have two, right?
You can do two.
So
I'll let you have two.
Cool. Okay, cool. The first one for me is Origin Unknown, the movie with Katie Sackhoff, where there's a scene where we were shooting. It's a very intimate drama scene, not effects or anything like that. But we had a ball that was representing the CG robot, and we had Katie Sackhoff on one side here. And it was such an emotional scene. She was crying, and then when you go in the edit and you put the CG robot in there, I'm thinking, wow, I actually created a dramatic scene with a real actor and a CGI actor. I'm like, that just blows my mind, and it became one of my favorite scenes. But also, that's the scene that got me the job to direct the Disney shows, and pretty much I got seen in a different light, where people were like, oh, you're not the effects guy now.
Yeah, and HaZ, that is absolutely amazing. And I actually tricked you. I'm only going to let you have that one. But it was so wonderful speaking with you. And we would be best friends in a whole nother world. Hope to meet you in person someday.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.